Welcome to Customer Value Cast, a podcast dedicated to helping you acquire, retain, and expand more customers by putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle. Join our host, Ross Fulton, founder and CEO of ValueWise, as he dives deep into how recurring revenue businesses are maximizing their growth and valuations with the industry's leading experts and pioneers.
Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Customer Value Cast, the show dedicated to putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle so your business can retain and expand more revenue from your customers. Today I'm joined by someone I've been a fan of for a number of years through Brent, the books you've written. We're joined by Brent Adamson, who is the Global Head of Research and Communities at Ecosystems. And we're going to really drill into this discipline of value management, value definition, all things value, which I think those of you who have tuned into this show before know that I am clinically obsessed with, and there aren't many experts on the planet about this domain who have more expertise than you, Brent. So very excited for this conversation. For the audience and listeners here who may have not had an opportunity to connect with you or consume your work to date, maybe introduce yourself, your background, and what you're focused on today, and we'll go from there.
Sure, awesome, Ross, and hello everybody. So it's great to be with you. So my name is Brent Adamson. I am, as you mentioned, at a company now for the last about month or so, 5 weeks, at a company called Ecosystems. We could talk a little bit more about Eco if you'd like. Really cool company. But prior to that, for the last 19 years, hard to believe, I was at a company called First Corporate Executive Board, which then became CEB, which was then acquired by Gartner about 5 years ago. And I spent the bulk of my time at CEB Gartner in the B2B sales and B2B marketing practice. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research, advisory work, understanding just how commerce, B2B commerce, particularly around complex deals, works. Not everybody, but many will know that some of that research came out in the form of the books around the challenger idea, the challenger sale, the challenger customer. That's hit pretty well. It's done very well, which is great to see. Believe it or not, Ross, that book is now 10 years old. I'd like to think
that makes me feel old.
Well, tell me about it, right? I'd like to think I've done some cool work since then. A lot of our more recent work and the work that I'm kind of taking with me in the sense of conceptually, I think is critical for understanding the new world I'm in around value, is ideas around something called buyer enablement, sense making, which is an article I put in HBR in January of 2022 of this year, around something we call sense making. And we can talk a little bit about how all that fits into value. But if I could, Russ, and one thing I would tell you has been really interesting for me in the last month or so, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is so I've been plugged into this world of sales and marketing very deeply for a long time, 2 decades. And I've had the privilege, I sincerely the privilege of getting to know some very senior people, C-suite officers, CEOs at very large companies who live and die by B2B sales and marketing. And yet the weird thing, Ross, now that I'm in this world of value management and value engineering, value consulting, value realization, value fill in the blank, I can probably, thinking back across those 2 decades, I can probably count on one hand the number of chief sales officers that I know who proactively brought up the concept of value management, which is fascinating to me. So I've been adjacent to this world of value. We've certainly been talking around this idea of value for years, but as a discipline, as something programmatic, as something systematic, as something strategic, I think there's a massive opportunity for us to understand this collectively better and import it more effectively into not just success, but sales and marketing, and build the last thing I want to do is build yet another function in the commercial space. It's not about that. It's really about, it's about building a discipline around value that stretches from marketing all the way through sales, success, service, expansion, you name it. And I think it's not a massive opportunity for us at Ecosystems or for you guys at ValueWise. I think it is that, but I think it's more importantly, it's a massive opportunity for commercial organizations, for companies to do the one thing that they continually struggle to do, especially today, which is just differentiate themselves in a really crowded marketplace. So I'm super excited about it.
I fully agree and do. I mean, selfishly, sort of, it is absolutely an opportunity that I think exists for companies to help those commercial operators succeed with, and was the genesis of Value Eyes. Clues kind of in the name of the company, and our development of the value experience framework, which contains 6 disciplines centered on exactly what you describe. I think what's changed in terms of, I think, starting to hear more of those chief sales officers, those revenue leaders think about and prioritize value management, value realization, value engineering, is just the economic imperative that the recurring revenue business model drives around ensuring customers do realize value, because that's how we retain and expand those customers and therefore make those recurring revenue models work. And I can think of, some fantastic leaders out there like Brandon Sweeney, the CRO at HashiCorp, John Sabino, the CCO at now VMware.
Oh, John Sabino,
was
God, that genius. Yes, I've heard.
They've seen the writing on the wall, and
so I got to know.
So the tide is turning thanks to them.
Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, we'll talk more about that offline maybe. I got to know John when he was at NBC Universal way back when, as part of a GE company, and he was rolling out Salesforce and doing things with Salesforce that no one had ever seen before. And that guy's been on the cutting edge of everything from like across his entire career. Not that I'm trying to turn the podcast into the John Sabino show, but that's fascinating. His name should come up. That's
yeah, it is. And I think John has not to sit here talking about John and putting words in his mouth, but he has a very strong pre-sales background, and I share that domain as well. And Brandon was an incredible sales leader, now owns the entire revenue lifecycle, and there's some sort of consistent DNA there. But I fully agree that it is starting to take on its own form. I fully agree the opportunity is to avoid it being lost as just another function in the enterprise organizational structure that does something in the customer lifecycle, value delivery, value management, value selling, value agreement with customers. All the values it needs to be an integrated concept across the customer lifecycle, which all the functions are collaborating around through an approach, more of a discipline and competency based approach. But I want to get to another HBR article that you wrote a few years ago about that really kind of talked about the types of value, and very much value in the context of B2B relationships and B2B selling and relationships, because we bang on a lot about this as Value Eyes. We can talk all day about how to deliver value, how to sell value, how to measure value, how to do that at scale, etc. It's all redundant if we don't have a very clear, carefully designed definition of value. Right. That we as a B2B organization are looking to sell, deliver, and measure, verify with our customers. And value is, so Scott McCorkle he's been on the show before. He's the founder, CEO of MetaCX, who do some very cool stuff around value collaboration, value verification through their technology. Is very much like, not in more the sort of value measurement side, not so much the value selling side, like where Eco is very much focused. But he sort of is he just boils it down to something very simple, which is value is a thing. And I fully agree with that, in that it's value in a lot of companies historically has been this kind of wishy-washy, fluffy, magical rainbows and castles in the sky value proposition, as opposed to being something that's very, very real and measurable and needs to be verifiable. And so it all leads back to this concept around defining value. Yeah. And I love your article because it calls out I think the very important structure to think about when it comes to value definition, which is there is value for your customers at a company level. There's value for your customers at a sort of professional user level, but still thinking functional value, still thinking enabling them to perform their jobs to be done in a more efficient or effective way. But then you talk about more personal value and how that is a defined value, needs to be a defined value type and integrated into this whole value strategy. Let's start with sort of those 3 value types at a definition level. Okay. And you take us through your definition of those 3 value types and why each is important.
All right. So first of all, my background for my entire career, even before I joined CEB, is I'm a researcher. I'm a trained professional researcher. Is what I like to do. I like to generate knowledge and share knowledge. It's kind of what I do for a living. And I think what's interesting around the space around value is there's just so much we don't really fully know, right? There's and appreciate and understand, and just wrapping your brain around something as subjective or as abstract or as maybe even as ephemeral as this concept of value. What is value? Are there different flavors of value? And I think a lot of us have been trying to do this for a while, right? As you know, there's a number of different frameworks and concepts of value, and some have 3 or 4 flavors, some have 40 or 50 flavors of value, and each has their sort of practical application. Here's sort of one of the things we learned, and to be totally upfront about this is work that we did at Gartner. There's a guy named Carl Schmidt who actually co-authored that article that you mentioned with me, and someone named Anna Bird. These are the senior researchers on the team at Gartner that helped us build this a number of years ago. And at the time, I think it was an idea before its time in the B2B space, Ross. I'll tell you, I went around the world, that's back when we used to travel 7-8 years ago in this case, as sharing this idea with B2B marketers, and they just kind of didn't get it. Not because it's just because it was kind of an idea before its time in ways. But let me tell you what we found. So it's work that we originally had done partly in partnership with some with Google, actually, way back when, around trying to understand dimensions of value. And where we started with this like classic idea of there's business value and there's personal value, BV and PV. And we're trying to understand how they work. It's like, by the way, it's not really valuable or helpful to understand different dimensions of value unless those different dimensions actually act in different ways. If they have different impacts, if they operate in a different manner on different, if they're effectively different levers you pull for different outcomes. If they kind of all do the same thing, then the differences are kind of a difference without a distinction. So that's what we're trying to understand is what are the differences that actually have a distinction. And so it's studying lots of different forms of value and how customers perceive value. I won't bother with methodology unless you want to, but what we found is the punchline of this work was what we identified as part of this work was not 2 dimensions of value, business and personal, but 3 dimensions of value. And so we had to give them names. And 2 of it was weird because they kind of like this weird Venn diagram with business and personal. So 2 of them were kind of businessy. And then, but the one there's one that's clearly business. There was one that was clearly personal, and there's one in the middle that's kind of businessy and personally, if that's a word, not a word. But anyway, so what we did is we named them this. We named them company values. Company values are the value that an individual, a stakeholder, buyers might perceive as accruing to the value that accrues to the company. It helps us as a company be more efficient. It helps us as a company be more productive. It helps us increase our margins or improve our productivity or whatever it might be. So that's company value. Then there's something we call professional value. Professional value is value that you perceive to accrue to you as an individual, but in a professional setting. So you as an employee, it makes me better at my job. It makes me more skilled. Again, it makes me as an individual more productive. And then finally, there was this other dimension of value, which is also deeply personal, but it was far less about work. It wasn't about how you perceive yourself in your job, but just how you perceive yourself full stop. So we called that identity value. And identity value is things like the value that you perceive in something as it accrues to your sense of self-worth or your sense of recognition among others or your sense of doing good or your sense of just positive feelings about yourself. And now, so that's really interesting. So I can say there's value that's like good for the company, good for me as a worker, an employee, and then good for me as a human or a person. Now you might say, all right, so what? Which is kind of what I said when I first saw this, but here's where it gets interesting is what, again, these 3 flavors of value, they weren't just things like we put our finger in the wind and say, I think there's not 2, I think there's 3, but rather through a pretty rigorous methodological study or a research study, these things proved to be statistically different. They operated inside the models in different ways. And one of the ways that once we identify them as statistically distinct from one another through something called factor analysis, then you could actually begin to measure their relative impact on certain outcomes. And this, Ross, is where it got super interesting because what we found is only one of those 3 flavors of value, in this case, identity value, was effective at increasing the likelihood of someone being willing to go advocate, not just for your solution, but just to advocate for a course of action, to advocate for change, to put their own personal credibility on the line, to go among their colleagues and say, I think we should stop doing this and start doing that. It might be buy this company, but it might be install this technology. It might be, outsource this activity. But what we found is because let's face it, when there's, somewhere between 5 and 15 stakeholders all involved in a customer purchase, that gets really complex. It's complex, it's complicated, it's frustrating, it's fraught, it's exhausting. I got to put my credibility on the line. Nobody wants to do that. And so one of the things we all have to overcome as suppliers in this world is motivation. We have to, how do you make someone willing to go do that? Because that's gross, right? So and it turns out like oh, this is really good for my company, turns out not to be a motivator. Or this is going to make me more productive so I can get more work done, turns out not to be a motivator. But if I do this, I'm going to increase my recognition. I'm going to increase my sense of self-worth. I'm going to increase the chances that I can have a broader impact on the people around me. That turns out to be a motivator. So if you're looking to, this is why understanding these distinctions with the difference matters, because if we're thinking about defining dimensions of value with our customers, and we're seeking to create that flywheel of change inside the customer organization, then we need to understand how we might tap into identity value with one of those individual stakeholders to put them, set them in motion. Now, the last thing I'd say there, Ross, is once they set them in motion through identity value, it's not that they're going to go to their colleagues and say, I think we need to do this or buy this because it's good for me or makes me feel better about myself. They're going to go have that conversation through the lingua franca, the common language of company value. But the reason why they're having that conversation is identity value. So that's what we've. So now that I'm at Ecosystems and I've got a mandate to go conduct more research, you can bet your bottom dollar this is something I want to dig into more deeply, because I think there's a lot of unanswered questions and sort of corners to dig around in there to really figure out how this works.
Yeah. No, so much good stuff to unpack there. I think one of the elements I'd love to unpack, you touched on towards the end there, around the connection between those three value types, and what I would prescribe as being the essential concept of connecting those three value types, because I have the luxury, the I guess the honor almost of looking inside many B2B technology organizations and looking at them in this type of context. And what I see a lot of is the company being very strong on one, maybe possibly two, but often just one of the value types, and that value type not being connected to any of the other value types. Right. So I'll give you an example of, there's a lot of technology vendors out there who they go very strong on the identity value, but drive that identity value, i.e. the value that's very personal for the stakeholder or the influencer inside their customer or prospect. And they're driving that identity value by giving that contact inside the prospect or customer a platform to build their brand and build their sort of personal success. Come speak at the conference, come do the webinars, etc. And that's great, and that's a good strategy in terms of building that efficacy inside that contact, because you're enhancing their identity value. It has no connection to the professional or company value. And when it comes to the crunch, and this I think again it becomes very pertinent when we think about the subscription economy and companies that have this recurring revenue business model. When it comes to the crunch and they're trying to make a decision on should we renew, expand, or indeed maybe initially purchase this business product, they have to be doing that on professional and or company value as well as identity value.
Agreed.
And if that has been underinvested in terms of either the selling of that company / professional value, or indeed the delivery of that professional or company value, and all they've got to run with is identity value, that's where...
I actually thought you were going to go the other way around. I thought you were going to go 180-degree difference, which is because what I often see, and maybe actually we wind up in the same place by starting at different ends, right? But what I often see is just the focus on the company value, the ROI calculation.
Absolutely.
Right? The TCO, the total cost of ownership, the lifetime value assessment, whatever acronym you like, right? It's like, I'm going to look how much this is going to save your company, or look how much money it's going to make your company. And so now, so in that world, so notice that I've got one of two scenarios now. Either in my scenario, I was like, oh, this is really great for my company. I'm not going to do it, but somebody should do this because it's good for. But you haven't motivated me to go want to engage in that battle of consensus creation, which is awful. It may not be a battle; it may just be a slog. But so I'm not motivated. Now your scenario is the exact opposite, which is you got me motivated, but I don't know how to connect to others, right? So I don't know what to actually say when I get there to have that conversation. That's why I think, again, understanding all three of these and how they interplay becomes critical. And this gets into some really interesting ideas of. One of the things we talk a lot about in the Challenger Customer, which is the second of the two Challenger books, is I think it's germane here, which is the first chapter opens with this one of the weirdest things we ever found in our research, in my mind, was the better and better you get at positioning your offer on the dimensions of value that an individual stakeholder cares about, the less likely that company is to buy a broad scale or a large scale solution. In other words, if I get better and better at personalizing and tailoring my message to individual stakeholders, the less likely that group is to buy the bigger, broader solution, which is the exact opposite of what you think it would be. We explain in the book and why all that happens in detail, but the short story is because of all these different stakeholders. It's not just that there's a lot of them, but they're very diverse in terms of their priorities, in terms of their metrics, in terms of their function, where they sit. One's in IT, and one's in security, and one's in marketing, and one's in finance, one's in procurement. So they all have very different metrics. They have different dashboards. And so if you customize to one set of metrics for one individual, it's your point, they don't have the means for that connective tissue to create that connective tissue to others. And so the punchline, I often talk about what I call bumper stickers. It's like, let's put all that in a simple phrase, which is I think the single biggest opportunity we have here in this discussion is not to do a better job of connecting individual stakeholders to us through things like identity value, but to do a better job of connecting those individual stakeholders with each other. So how do I motivate someone to want to go on that journey, but then equip them with the playbook? Go talk to finance, say it like this, here's the model, here's the words, here's the spreadsheet, it's already built for you. So that, and this is where I think having that really disciplined approach to value that gets the action moving and then creates the connection is a really nice way to think about it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. I sort of led with over-indexing on the identity value as sort of an example, but absolutely, I've seen it endlessly on the other foot in terms of over-indexing on company value. This is the value to your company, as you say, all the ROI statements in the world, but no connection to how that translates into either professional value or identity value.
It's weird on that one, Ross, when it doesn't work, right? So I build this amazing cost calculator and I got all these dimensions in my TCO or something, and it kind of falls flat and nothing happens, or this thing like sits in the middle of your pipeline and languishes there for 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, and the forecast never comes through. And so you look at it and you diagnose it, well, they must not understand the value of our solution. So what you do is you go back and start adding yet even more dimensions to your company value cost. It's like you just double down on the thing that failed to get you to where you wanted to be in the first place. It's understandable, but this is why I do research, right? Because because you've uncovered these weird dynamics that don't seem obvious when you first look at it. And then you begin to understand that, oh, I kind of see what's going on here. There's no one's motivated to go make this happen because there's no whiffum for any individual to overcome the inertia, the frustration of consensus creation.
Yeah. And I think this, again, going to continue taking us down sort of the Alice in Wonderland hole for a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll prevent us from going too deep, otherwise we'll be here for hours and go cross-eyed. But the concept of that value definition, those value types, the strategy around those value types, how that varies when we're talking what certainly your sort of research and insight has been largely focused on in a sales context, and let's say specifically a net new sales context, versus the role and the approach and the strategy around the value types when we're talking about renewing customers and even expanding. I mean, expanding kind of sits maybe in the middle in terms of that sort of scientific spectrum of how you apply these value types. But I do think it's a very interesting context around the renewal sale. And let's call it, if I just oversimplify and not get into semantics around it, there's the renewal sale and then there's the net new sale. I do see some distinctions and some very, at least key variables around the approach and the connections that need to be built in regards to company professional identity value when you're doing net new sales, which I spent a lot of my career doing, and how you're approaching a renewal sale, which again, I spent a lot of my operator career doing, because I feel like the weighting and the connections between those three value types do flex.
I think that's probably right.
Renewal scenario versus net new. And again, you go back to these companies which you and I specialize in, who are now recurring revenue enterprises. So the renewal is mission critical alongside the net new sale. It arguably just creates a more complicated landscape for them now to engineer their value strategy around. But I think it's critical to recognize those two distinctions. And I'm absolutely not a research expert and specialist and savant like you are, but so when I say hypothesis, this is kind of a very grand word to say largely sort of
It's a guess.
gut instinct and industry pattern recognition based on some experience.
Oh, that's so much better what I say, because I just say a hypothesis is a fancy word for guess, which is what I think it is.
Well, there we go. I'm clever alignment. So yes, my guess.
Yeah.
An educated guess. That's a happy medium.
But Ross, if I could jump in there for just a second.
Oh, please. Yeah.
So first of all, just to throw out a lob and then run away, throw out a bomb and run away from it is what I've come to determine's the wrong word, believe in all the research I've been involved in for the last 20 years is that an expansion sale looks a heck of a lot more. The physics of it work a lot more like an acquisition sale than a renewal. So
yes, I agree.
Because if for a renewal, I'm asking customers to embrace the status quo. For an expansion, I'm asking customers to embrace change, and those are two very different things. But to your point, if you were to boil that down and ask me the question of like, Brent, how does this work in a renewal scenario? My answer is, Ross, I don't know, but I want to know. So the one thing I would tell anyone, I think my mom might be listening and a few others, right? But for those who are listening, and I mean this sincerely, and if this is one of my mandates at ECO is to go out and do this kind of research. And if there's anyone who wants to come on this journey with us, we're looking for organizations. We need access to data. We need, in terms of resources, whether it's bodies to do analysis. I've got a network of people I can touch, connect into. But if you want to be involved, any of you out there in a project where we go and study this in more depth, just shoot me a note on LinkedIn or at badamson@ecosystems.us. This train's leaving the station pretty soon, and I'd love to get people on it, because I think this is I think it's important for all of us in value, and for that matter, just in selling, to understand this. But if you're a researcher like me, it's just the thing I geek out about this, Ross, is that it's just because I'm a social scientist by training. That's really what I am. What this really is to me is sales and value and success is just a context within which we're just trying to understand how we as human beings operate. You know what I mean? And that's where I geek out. I just want to understand, like, how does all this work? And then if we can use that to help companies be more successful on both the buying and the selling end, all the better. But there's a lot of really cool research to be done here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what a generous and I think important invitation you made there, and encourage everyone listening, including my mum who might be listening, to seek you out and participate in that project, because I think it is fascinating. I think that one of the key themes I pull out, I'm a big sort of Seth Godin fan, is the role of status and how status fits within these value types, and the role of kind of the strategy of value in a B2B concept, because there's different status types that each of these value types are playing too, and then the relationship between that status. To your point around the different players when we're talking about B2B, especially B2B enterprise selling and enterprise customer management, we've got many different stakeholders and influencers. It is a fascinating tapestry of status that's happening in there, which value needs to play within. So.
On that point, and there's some, and this is where our original work started on, the company value, the BV versus BV, business value versus personal value, because it felt pretty obvious. Like if we're talking about personal value in a consumer setting, like buying perfume or jeans or makeup or cosmetics, whatever it might be, that often we would think of that as an emotional purchase, right? I buy this car because of the way it makes me feel. But then once we get into the business world and I'm buying a CRM system or industrial turbines or business services, we have a tendency to think, well, that's a rational decision, right? That's a decision based on facts and numbers and payback periods and rates of return. And the thing that I think for a long time we kind of overlooked is that the heart and soul of those decisions are still human beings, and human beings still operate in these emotional ways. And so which is not to say that all B2B purchases are, it's like I buy with my heart and justify with my head. I think that's too simplistic, but nonetheless, these really complex dynamics of buying groups and how people interact with each other. People say it's not companies that buy things, it's people that do. And I'd say, yeah, it is. It's not people that buy things, it's groups of them that do. And so you got to get into these group dynamics, and that all of that is psychology and humanity. And so companies have to see returns, a rational business return, a payback period, a margin increase, whatever it might be. But but what I'm finding is when you're selling effectively, and I think star performers do this automatically, instinctively, is you're not just selling based on what you want your customers to know. You're selling based on what you want your customers to feel. You're solving for an emotion as much as you're solving for cognition, and and watching the interplay between those two things is really interesting, and figuring out which emotions do I need to solve for in the first place becomes a critical question, I think, that we just haven't studied enough.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I'm not sure if you do, but I see a connection there between what you just described and then what you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation around another HBR article around sense making.
Yeah.
And I see a connection there in that sense making, and I would love for you to kind of give your words on this, but essentially enabling your prospects and or your customers to make sense of the deluge of information and content that they're probably having fired at them by the vendor, whether that be in a sales context or a post-sales context. And I think sort of defining what does make sense mean? How do you measure sense? It is their ability to interpret that at an almost psychological level as it relates to how that impacts their these value types and their status, etc., and consume and make sense of the content in or the information in that way. Would you see that connection as well?
Yeah,
or maybe talk quickly about that sense making concept.
Did that make sense about sense making? Yes, it did. So yes. By the way, at this point, if this were a marketing podcast, I'd go into full on rant mode, which I won't do, but at least not about that. But there is this really interesting backstory, particularly among marketers, but us as suppliers in our efforts to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, where our products can easily be replicated, our solutions over time can easily be not easily, but can be replicated. There was a bet that most of us collectively and individually placed about 5 to 10 years ago around the best way to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace is to be a thought leader, to say really smart things to our customers. And with marketing automation and content marketing, we can now do that at scale. We can essentially spam the world with really smart data-backed insights. And the fact that the Challenger books hit right at the beginning of that wave was pure luck. But goodness knows we've been part of the story of sort of pushing that forward. Where we are today, and this is why I still believe deeply in everything we wrote in Challenger, but I believe in it deeply in a very different context today than when we first produced it. Because today we live in a world of not just high volumes of content or high quantities of content, but high quantities of quality content, where we're all putting out really quality, more or less, high quality research backed by data and then white papers and backed by subject matter experts. I call it the smartness arms race, and I think what's happened effectively is the smartness arms race has ended in a tie where your customer and the only one to lose is your customer, because where it's left them is, in the old days, like, I'm so empowered with all this information, I just have to separate wheat from chaff or signal from noise. But what do you do, Ross, when it's all signal, or when the vast majority is signal? You're telling me to zig, they're telling me to zag, you're convincing, they're convincing, you've got data, they've got data. Now I'm just confused at a higher level, and so I just choose not to choose. I choose to study it more. Call me back in 6 months. Your customer never really wants you to call them back in 6 months, by the way. But So the opportunity here for differentiation is less about being frame breaking and just giving them yet another insight to blow their minds. Although that's not, you probably want to be involved in that somewhat. You don't want to unilaterally disarm in a smartness arms race. That would be a bad idea. But it's less about frame breaking. I think the opportunity now, the new incremental one, is not to be frame breaking, but to be what I call frame making. How can I provide my customers a framework within which they can come to their own conclusions about what they believe is right for them, such that they feel more confident, there's the emotion, that they feel more confident not in you and your product, but they feel more confident in their ability to make big, complex decisions on behalf of their organization. And so this is the story that I and lots of other people at Gartner have been working on for the last 5 years or so. As you mentioned, this is an HBR. It's an article called Sense Making for Sales. And so more detail on that. But this is where I think value becomes really interesting, because I think value becomes a really powerful tool to help your customers create a framework for decision making that helps them feel more confident in their decisions, their ability to even make decisions in the first place. And so this is one of the things that got me to Eco, beyond the culture and the company and the software, and Chad Quinn, the founder, is a great guy, is this really interesting opportunity to think of what does value management look like as a frame-making tool, which I think is really understudied and really powerful.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I'm glad because this is where I wanted to sort of wrap things up and talk about the technology side of things, because we can talk for hours upon hours upon hours around the strategy and how to do this, how to do that, how to do that. When we're talking about applying that within a B2B enterprise, we've got to think, well, how do we operationalize that at scale? And the answer has very much been proven out, from my perspective at least, looking at companies, working in these companies, that the answer isn't simply, oh, we just train them on it and then off they go, or give them a bunch of slide decks that explain kind of the sales tactics, and maybe we'll stick it in Confluence. No, you've got to operationalize it through technology. And you've got to arm them with technology that enables them to execute the strategy, ideally at scale. And obviously, you just joined Eco, who is if the audience isn't clear, a technology company. And my question isn't specifically directed about or at Eco, but more that category of technology around what you see as the future of technology in the context of this value management discipline, and very specifically, the ability to address each of those value types within that value management discipline through technology, because I'd say the painting in very broad brushes, the stereotypical view of that type of technology, which is unfair in many cases, including with ecosystems, but it's, I just build my business case statements there. I build my ROI statements. I do all the company value calculations, and it gives me this whiz-bang interface to put it in front of the buyer. How does that evolve? How is that going to evolve, in your opinion?
So the thing I've become most fascinated in, well, among other things, but so again, if the thing that we need to solve for in helping our customers increase the likelihood of our customers buying bigger, buying sooner, is not their confidence in us, but their confidence in themselves. So I'm coming at it from that starting point. So that's the thing I'm trying to solve for, is how do I boost customer decision confidence or confidence? It stands to reason then, I don't have data to back, I don't have a bar chart to prove this definitively. I wish I did, but it's kind of a logical conclusion, which is it stands to reason if what you're solving for is customers' confidence in themselves, then customers have to feel that it was their decision in the first place. And what that means is, whether we're talking about value management or just selling techniques more broadly, I've become really fascinated in a much more Socratic approach to selling, right? So where you're asking questions, you're providing a framework, maybe a diagnostic tool or a maturity model that where the tool is asking questions, but one way or another, you're prompting an exploration with your customers, and they're coming to their own conclusions. It's like a choose your own adventure. So you're chalking the pitch, or you're chalking the field, but within those boundaries, you allow degrees of freedom so that your customers, with some guidance, can say, I think A is more appropriate for us. No, I think B is more appropriate for us. And they're the ones that make that choice, because then they can feel more confident in their decision, because it was their choice to begin with, but it wasn't an overwhelming choice. It wasn't just like, I leave them to nothing. I give them a framework. This is the answer to, I think, in my mind, to your question, which is the role of technology here is to provide that framework, but to allow that kind of collaboration / exploration of customers, either with your sellers collaboratively, which is where ecosystems lives, or even, I think the future is independently. Like, why not take this kind of toolkit and put it on your website and allow customers to use it on their own? Something I was talking to on LinkedIn this morning, in a conversation I got into, is maybe put it into some sort of digital sales room, which is a very cool new technology where customers can go into it's like a holodeck for sales, right? It's like I can go into this virtual room and I can use the calculator. I can bring in different people in my group. We can with a rep, without a value engineer, with a value engineer. But one way or another, I think it's that technology creates this experience. There's, by the way, the other word, Ross, we have not yet used in this conversation, is customer experience. And what kind of experience can we create for customers that feels easy, that feels valuable, that feels relevant, that boosts confidence? And I think that's where value calculation technologies like ecosystems can meet really interesting things, like digital sales rooms can pair up with really cool tools around sense making and maturity models and diagnostic models. You put the whole thing together, and eventually I think it's going to, I don't know, it won't collapse, but they'll coalesce around an experience. I think that's what we ultimately need to solve for, is an experience for customers that allows them to feel confident in their conclusions, and also enables them to come back and revisit those conclusions over time so that they can retest their knowledge. And of all the things out there, now this is a straight up plug, I'll just give it to you, but when I look around the marketplace and I see all the tools out there, this is why I'm at Eco, is because when I look at what we're doing, I feel pretty excited that we're on the right track there, which is super cool.
Yeah, no, yeah. I agree. And that's, I say, we, two organizations have a strong connection. And again, it is with that experience, our framework at ValueWise is called Value Experience for a reason, VX. And the synergy we have on that subject is just one of the many synergies we have, because you do have a great product and a great vision as a company, and we're excited to see how that evolves. I'm deeply excited, having been a big fan of the Challengers work when it first came out, and used that extensively as an operator when I was in pre-sales and sales, and then extended it into post-sales. The fact that you've joined Brent, the Eco team, it's exciting times, and I think it's to the benefit of all the domain and the B2B technology industry.
The pressure's on, right? I got to deliver.
You got to deliver now. It's a big sale made now.
Yeah, I know.
But Brent, appreciate all the time today and the insight you shared. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know you did it briefly earlier, but just quickly again, for those who would like to follow up with you, connect with you, continue a conversation, how can people best find you and connect with you?
Probably the easiest way is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out and make a connection there, and follow or just connect. The website is ecosystems.us, and particularly if you go under the resources tab, I'm working on getting it out from under the resources tab, but currently under the resources tab is a link to our customer value community. This is a community of professionals across a range of functional areas, all interested in working with building a value discipline in their organization. We've got just under 1,000 people active in that community. It's a webinar series, a Slack group as well. I'm active in that Slack group almost every day, posting, asking questions, throwing out bombs, that sort of thing. So we'd love to have you as part of the community. Again, the CVC, or the customer value community, and you can find that at ecosystems.us under the resources tab.
Awesome. Thank you, Brent. That was a great conversation. To everyone listening, watching, thank you for joining us. Encourage you to connect with Brent. Check out Ecosystem's website for all the great resources. ValueWise.co has a ton of other resources that are very complementary and address a lot of what we've talked about today. Please feel free to check this out. And we'll see you next time. For now, look after yourselves, look after your customers, and we'll speak soon.
Cheers, everyone.